It was a long, exhausting day at work, the kind of day that made you grateful for even the small reprieve of a hot meal. As I left the office that night, I decided to stop by Chick-fil-A on my way home. It was already late, past the dinner rush, but Chick-fil-A's food was always worth the detour. Their parking lots and lobbies usually buzz with activity until closing, so I thought nothing of heading there, hoping to grab a quick bite and decompress. When I pulled into the parking lot, though, something felt off. The usual energy that surrounded Chick-fil-A was missing. The bright lights of the restaurant seemed to accentuate the emptiness of the lot, not diminish it. Only a few scattered cars remained, and the faint hum of a nearby street lamp was the only sound breaking the silence. The quiet unnerved me in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't the normal kind of quiet you'd expect late at night. It felt heavier, like the air itself was holding its breath. I parked my car and took a moment to scan my surroundings. The restaurant's windows glowed warmly, casting rectangular patches of light onto the asphalt. I could see a lone employee moving behind the counter inside. That small sign of normalcy gave me a bit of comfort as I stepped out of my car and began walking toward the entrance. That's when I saw him. He was standing right by the front doors, his silhouette rigid against the light spilling out from the restaurant. At first I thought he was just another Chick-fil-A employee on a smoke break, or maybe taking a breather between shifts. He wore the uniform, a red polo shirt, black pants, and the trademark Chick-fil-A hat pulled low over his dark hair. But as I got closer, something about him didn't sit right with me. He was standing too still, almost unnaturally so, and his head was tilted slightly downward, though I could feel his eyes tracking my every move. His posture was stiff, like he was bracing himself for something. "Excuse me," he said suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence. I stopped in my tracks, startled by how abrupt it was. There was something strange about his tone, low, strained, like he was forcing the words out. I glanced at him warily. "Yeah?" I asked cautiously. "I need a ride," he said, his words tumbling out quickly. The request caught me off guard. A ride? Why would an employee of a fast food restaurant need a ride from a random customer? I frowned, my unease growing by the second. "I can't do that," I said firmly. He didn't respond. He didn't move. He just stood there, staring at me in silence. The weight of his gaze was almost suffocating, and I had to force myself to break eye contact. Heart pounding, I skirted around him and hurried toward the door, hoping the interaction was over. As I stepped inside, I glanced back over my shoulder. He was still standing there, but now he had turned to face the doors, as if contemplating whether to follow me. The lobby was quiet, nearly empty save for one employee behind the counter. She greeted me with a polite smile, but it faltered slightly when she noticed my tense demeanor. "You okay?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. I nodded quickly, trying to shake off the encounter. "Yeah, I'm fine," I said, though my voice didn't sound entirely convincing. As I approached the counter to place my order, the employee leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Hey, just so you know, that guy outside, he doesn't work here." My stomach dropped. "What?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded toward the man, who was still lingering by the doors. "He's been hanging around for hours, talking to customers and acting weird. We thought he left earlier, but I guess he's back." Her words sent a chill down my spine. If he didn't work here, why was he wearing the uniform? Was it stolen? Bought online? And why was he asking random people for rides? My mind raced with possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. As we spoke, the man suddenly turned and walked away from the doors, disappearing into the shadows of the parking lot. I let out a small breath of relief, though the tension in my chest didn't fully dissipate. I placed my order and waited near the counter, trying to shake the lingering unease. The employee behind the counter seemed on edge too, glancing toward the windows every few seconds. "We've called security before," she said almost to herself, "but he always leaves before they get here." Her words did little to calm my nerves. A few minutes later, my order was ready. I grabbed the bag and thanked the employee before heading toward the exit. As I pushed the door open and stepped outside, The night air felt colder, heavier. I clutched the bag tightly and started toward my car, keeping my head down and my pace brisk. That's when I saw him again. He was standing right next to my car. My heart sank as I realized he was leaning against the driver's side door, his shadowy figure partially illuminated by the nearby street lamp. I stopped dead in my tracks, dread pooling in my stomach. He straightened up as he noticed me approaching, his posture stiff and deliberate. "Can you give me a ride?" he asked again, his voice slightly louder this time, but still carrying that same strange, desperate tone. "No," I said firmly, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to sound confident. "I told you I can't." He didn't move. He didn't argue. He just stood there, staring at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. I couldn't get to my car without going past him, and there was no way I was going to turn my back on him. After a few tense moments, I made a decision. Slowly, I began backing away, my eyes never leaving him. Once I was far enough, I turned and walked quickly back to the restaurant. The lobby felt like a haven compared to the oppressive darkness of the parking lot. I made my way to the counter, where the same employee from earlier looked at me with concern. "He's by my car," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She frowned, her expression hardening. "He needs to leave," she said, her voice firmer this time. Just as she said it, the door creaked open behind me. My blood ran cold as I turned to see the man stepping inside. He wasn't looking at the employee. He was looking directly at me. "You need to leave," the employee said loudly, her voice echoing in the empty lobby. For a moment, he didn't respond. Then, out of nowhere, he shouted a string of curses, his voice reverberating off the walls. The sudden outburst made me flinch, but to my relief, he turned and stormed out of the building. I stayed frozen for a moment, my heart hammering in my chest. The employee glanced at me, her expression a mix of concern and frustration. "You should wait a minute," she said. "Make sure he's gone." I nodded, grateful for her advice. After a few moments, I walked cautiously over to the window and peered outside. My car was still there, but so was he. He was standing near the driver's side door again, his hands moving to the handle. I watched in horror as he yanked on it, trying to open the door. Thankfully, I had locked it. After a few unsuccessful attempts, he muttered something to himself and walked away, heading toward another car parked a few spaces away. This was my chance. Summoning all the courage I could muster, I bolted out of the restaurant, sprinting across the parking lot toward my car. My keys were already in my hand, and I unlocked the door remotely as I ran. I threw the door open, jumped inside, and locked it behind me in one fluid motion. As I started the engine, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The man was now pacing near another car, his movements erratic and agitated. Without wasting another second, I backed out of the parking space and sped away, my heart racing as adrenaline coursed through my veins. Once I was a safe distance away, I called the police and reported everything I had seen. They assured me they would send someone to check it out, but I never heard anything more about it. Even now, weeks later, the memory of that night haunts me. I still wonder who he was, and what his intentions were. Was he a disgruntled former employee, someone who bought the uniform online, or something far more sinister? I'll never know, but one thing is certain. That night, I came far too close to finding out. My name is Caroline, and when I was in high school, I worked part-time at Chick-fil-A. It was my first real job, and for the most part, I liked it. The pay was decent for a teenager, and the work wasn't too difficult. My shifts mostly involved taking orders at the counter, and I got along well with my coworkers. But something happened during my 6 months there that made me quit, and still haunts me to this day. It all started gradually. So gradually, in fact, that I didn't even realize anything was wrong at first. It was just another ordinary shift, and I was working the counter during a relatively quiet afternoon. A man came in, probably in his 50s, with graying hair and a slightly unkempt appearance. He ordered his food and, while doing so, called me by my name. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I was wearing a name tag after all, but most customers never actually used my name. Still, I brushed it off as polite behavior and went about my day. A few days later, he showed up again. This time, he not only used my name but also complimented my appearance. "Caroline, you have such a lovely smile," he said, his eyes lingering on me a little too long. I forced a polite laugh and thanked him, though something about his tone made me feel uneasy. He didn't seem threatening at that point, just a little odd, but I wrote it off as harmless. It wasn't until his next visit that my discomfort turned into real unease. It was a particularly busy evening shift, and the line stretched almost to the door. When he reached the counter, I asked for his order, but he shook his head. "I don't want to order anything," he said, a strange smile spreading across his face. "I just wanted to see you." My stomach churned, and I felt a wave of nervous energy ripple through me. I didn't know what to say. People were waiting in line behind him, and I could feel their impatience. Thank you," I mumbled awkwardly, trying to keep things professional. He didn't seem to notice my discomfort. Instead, he leaned closer and asked, "So how are you doing? Any plans after work?" I gave him a quick, vague answer and waved over the next customer, hoping he'd take the hint. Thankfully, he left after that, but the encounter left me rattled. Who just comes into a busy restaurant to stare at someone? And why was he asking about my plans? Over the next few weeks, he kept coming back. His behavior remained unsettling, but never escalated to anything outright alarming, at least not at first. One night, after I finished my shift, I walked out to my car in the parking lot. It was late, and the lot was nearly empty. As I approached my car, I noticed another vehicle parked a short distance away. The man was sitting in the driver's seat, staring in my direction. My heart skipped a beat. He didn't wave or call out. He just sat there, watching. I avoided making eye contact and quickly got into my car. My hands were trembling as I started the engine. I pulled out of the parking lot as fast as I could, checking my rearview mirror to make sure he wasn't following me. He wasn't. Still, the incident left me shaken. Why was he there? He hadn't come into the restaurant, so was he just waiting for me? I didn't see him for a week or two after that, and I allowed myself to hope that he had finally lost interest. But then things took a darker turn. One night, after finishing a late shift, I drove home to my parents' house. It was a quiet neighborhood, the kind where unfamiliar cars stand out. As I turned onto our street, I noticed a vehicle parked across from our house. It was dark, but I could just make out the silhouette of someone sitting in the driver's seat. My pulse quickened as I realized it looked like the same man. I parked in the driveway and sat frozen for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel. He was watching me. I could feel it. Forcing myself to stay calm, I got out of the car and hurried inside. As soon as I closed the door behind me, I peeked out the window. The car was still there. Then, as if on cue, it started up and drove away. I didn't sleep much that night. The thought of him sitting outside my house made my skin crawl. The next day, I told a few of my coworkers about him. They were sympathetic and promised to keep an eye out for him if he came back. For a while, I didn't see him. I began to think that maybe I had scared him off by telling others about him. But then came the night that changed everything. It was a Saturday. I had worked a morning to afternoon shift and got off around 6 p.m. My parents and siblings had been out all day at some event, and I knew they wouldn't be home until late. As much as I hated being home alone, I figured I could handle a few hours of peace and quiet. By 8 p.m., the sun had set, and the house was dark except for a few lights I had turned on. I was sitting in the living room, scrolling through my phone, when I heard a knock at the front door. I froze. No one was supposed to be coming over, and we rarely got visitors this late. My stomach tightened as I stood up and crept toward the window, careful to stay out of sight. Peeking through the curtain, I felt my blood turn to ice. It was him. He was standing on the front porch, his face partially obscured by the shadows. My mind raced. How did he know where I lived? Had he followed me home before? My heart pounded as I watched him knock again, the sound echoing through the empty house. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stood there, paralyzed with fear. After a moment, he stepped off the porch and began walking around the side of the house. My stomach dropped as I realized he was heading toward the backyard. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my fingers trembling so badly I almost dropped it. "There's a man outside my house," I whispered to the operator. "He's in my backyard. Please, send someone." The operator assured me that help was on the way. I hung up and bolted to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. Then I climbed into the closet and crouched down, trying to make myself as small as possible. The minutes dragged by like hours as I waited in silence, straining to hear any sounds from outside. Finally, I heard the faint wail of sirens in the distance. Relief washed over me as the noise grew louder, signaling the arrival of the police. To my shock, they found him still in the backyard. He had been lingering near the back door, as if trying to decide whether to break in. They arrested him on the spot, and I felt a wave of relief so powerful I almost cried. I later found out that he had been banned from our Chick-fil-A location, and that I could file for a restraining order against him, which I did immediately. But even with those measures in place, I couldn't bring myself to go back to work. The fear of running into him again was too much. I quit my job shortly after and decided to focus on school. But even now, years later, I still think about that man and how much worse things could have been. To this day, I always double-check that my doors are locked, and I never take my safety for granted. Three years ago, during a warm summer night, I had an experience that still sends chills down my spine. It started like any other casual evening. I had plans to meet my close friend for dinner, and we decided on Chick-fil-A. The familiar spot was a favorite of ours, offering good food, friendly service, and a relaxed atmosphere. It was the perfect place to catch up after a busy week. We arrived later in the evening, close to their closing time. The inside of the restaurant was mostly empty, with just a few scattered customers finishing their meals. The usual hustle and bustle of a Chick-fil-A dining room had long since quieted down, leaving a kind of stillness that, in hindsight, felt unnerving. But at the time, I didn't think much of it. It was just a quiet night, nothing more. After placing our orders inside, we decided to sit outside on the patio to enjoy the warm summer breeze. The patio was a small, inviting space with several tables arranged neatly under soft string lights that cast a gentle glow over the area. Beyond the patio was the restaurant's parking lot, and past that, a 6-foot retaining wall made of pavers. Beyond the wall lay the woods, a dense, dark cluster of trees that stretched for what seemed like miles. I always thought it was strange how abruptly the commercial area ended at that wall. On one side, you had brightly lit shops and restaurants filled with life, and on the other, an expanse of shadowy forest that seemed almost untouched. That night, the woods felt especially dark, as if they were swallowing all the light around them. We chose a table in the middle of the patio and settled in, chatting and laughing as we ate. My friend and I had plenty to catch up on, so we barely noticed how quiet it was outside. The faint hum of distant traffic and the occasional chirp of crickets were the only sounds accompanying us. At one point, I glanced toward the woods. I wasn't sure why. Maybe it was a subconscious reaction to the eerie stillness in the air. But when I looked, something caught my eye. There was a figure in the trees. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The shadows in the woods were deep, and the faint light from the patio didn't reach far enough to clearly illuminate anything beyond the retaining wall. But as I stared, the figure became more distinct. A man was standing partially hidden behind a tree, his body blending into the darkness. "Hey," I said quietly, nudging my friend. "Do you see that?" My friend turned to look, squinting into the shadows. "What is that? Is someone standing there?" "I think so," I replied. my voice low. The man wasn't moving. He was just standing there, his face partially obscured by the tree trunk. From where we sat, it was impossible to make out any details, just the dark outline of his body and the unnerving fact that he seemed to be watching us. Maybe he's just out for a walk or something, my friend suggested, though their tone didn't sound entirely convinced. Through the woods? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Neither of us could come up with a reasonable explanation for why someone would be out there. The woods didn't have any clear trails, and they certainly weren't the kind of place someone would casually stroll through, especially at night. After a few moments, the man stepped back into the shadows and disappeared. My friend and I exchanged uneasy glances, but tried to brush it off. Maybe he was just passing through. Maybe there was nothing to worry about. But then, a few minutes later, he was back. This time, he stood in the same spot as before, his silhouette eerily still against the backdrop of the trees. He didn't make a sound, didn't move closer, just stood there, staring. It was unnerving, to say the least. "Okay, that's weird," my friend said, their voice hushed. "Weird doesn't even cover it," I replied, glancing at the woods again. Once more, the man disappeared into the darkness after a brief period of watching us. We tried to shake off the unease and focus on our conversation, but the tension lingered. My eyes kept darting back to the woods, half expecting him to reappear. And then he did. The third time he emerged from the shadows, he stayed longer than before. He stood there, motionless, watching us for what felt like an eternity. My stomach churned with unease, and I could tell my friend was just as uncomfortable. "Do you think we should say something to someone?" they asked, their voice low. "Like who?" "There's no one else out here," I pointed out. Eventually the man slipped away again, and we decided it was time to leave. Neither of us wanted to stay out there any longer. We gathered our things and walked back to the parking lot, sticking close together. My car was parked a few spaces away from my friend's, so we said our goodbyes quickly. They got into their car and drove off, leaving me alone in the quiet lot. I climbed into my car and locked the doors, a habit I developed after years of hearing cautionary tales. For a moment, I sat there scrolling through my phone, letting the engine idle as I checked my messages. And that's when I saw him again. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement near the retaining wall. My blood ran cold as I looked up and saw the man from the woods. He had climbed over the wall and was now standing in the parking lot, his gaze fixed on my car. My heart pounded as I watched him. He didn't hesitate for long. Within seconds, he started running toward me. Panic surged through me and I fumbled to start the car, my hands trembling so badly I could barely grip the gear shift. He reached the passenger side door and yanked on the handle, trying to open it. The sound of the locked door rattling sent a jolt of terror through me. I slammed the car into drive and hit the gas, my tires screeching as I sped out of the parking lot. My heart was racing, my hands shaking uncontrollably as I gripped the steering wheel. In the rearview mirror, I could see the man standing in the middle of the lot, watching as I drove away. I didn't stop until I was a safe distance away, pulling into a well-lit gas station to catch my breath. My hands were still shaking as I dialed 911, recounting the events to the dispatcher as clearly as I could. The police said they would send someone to check the area, but I never found out what became of the man. They didn't follow up with me, and I didn't press for answers. To this day, I have no idea who he was or what his intentions were. All I know is that I've never felt fear like I did that night. The memory of his figure emerging from the woods, running toward my car, and yanking on the door handle is something I'll never forget. I haven't been back to that Chick-fil-A since. Even driving past the area gives me an uneasy feeling, as if I might see him again, lurking in the shadows of the woods. That night changed the way I look at the world. It reminded me that danger can appear when you least expect it, even in the most ordinary of places. It's a lesson I'll carry with me forever. Always be aware of your surroundings, and always trust your instincts. When I was 7 years old, something happened that changed the way I saw the world. It was the kind of event that shakes your understanding of safety and innocence, leaving you with a permanent scar, even if no one can see it. Looking back, I often wonder how close I came to a much darker ending, one I was too young to even comprehend at the time. It started like any other outing. My parents, my little sister, and I had gone to Chick-fil-A for dinner. At 7, Chick-fil-A wasn't just a place to eat, it was an adventure. The food was great, sure, but what I really looked forward to was the play place. If you've ever been a kid in one of those play places, you'll know what I mean. It's like stepping into your own little world, a maze of tunnels and slides, where you can climb and crawl and forget about everything else. That evening, the restaurant was packed. Families crowded the tables, and kids chattered and laughed as they ate. The smell of chicken sandwiches and waffle fries filled the air, mingling with the faint sound of a children's song playing over the speakers. My parents found a booth near the center of the dining area, and we settled in. I remember sitting next to my mom, eating my chicken nuggets and sipping on lemonade. My little sister, who was only 3 at the time, sat in a booster seat, happily munching on her fries. After a while, though, I started to get restless. The noise of the restaurant was overwhelming, and all I could think about was the play place. From where I was sitting, I could see the colorful entrance, the bright plastic tubes beckoning me. "Can I go play?" I asked, looking up at my mom. She glanced at my dad, who nodded. "Sure," she said. "But stay inside the play place, and come back if you need anything." I didn't need to be told twice. I slid out of the booth, tossed my napkin onto the table, and headed straight for the play place. As soon as I stepped through the door, the noise of the dining area faded. It was like entering a different world. The play place was quiet, the air cool and still, except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. To my surprise, the play area was completely empty. I remember stopping just inside the entrance, looking around. Usually these places were full of kids, crawling through the tunnels and racing down the slides. But not tonight. Tonight, it was just me. At first, I was thrilled. Having the whole play place to myself felt like a rare treat. I climbed through the tunnels, crawled across the padded bridges, and slid down the slides over and over again. Time seemed to blur as I played, and for a while, I forgot about everything else. I don't know how long I was there, maybe 15 minutes, maybe 30, when I heard a voice. "Hey, kid," the voice called out. Startled, I froze, halfway through climbing up a vertical tunnel. The voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. Slowly, I climbed back down and turned to look. A man was standing just inside the play place entrance. He wasn't wearing a Chick-fil-A uniform, and he didn't look like any of the dads I'd seen in the dining area. He was tall, with unkempt hair and a scruffy beard. His clothes were wrinkled and mismatched, a jacket that looked too big for him and jeans that were frayed at the cuffs. Something about him felt wrong. "You need to come with me," he said, his voice low but firm. I didn't move. I just stared at him, confused. "Your parents sent me," he said, taking a step closer. "They're leaving, and they don't want to wait. We've got to go now." For a moment, I hesitated. His words didn't make sense. Why would my parents leave without me? But then I thought about how busy the restaurant was, how distracted my parents had seemed with my little sister. What if they really were leaving? The thought of being left behind was terrifying. The man held out his hand. "Come on," he said. "We don't have time to waste." I didn't know what else to do. My 7-year-old brain couldn't process the situation, couldn't see the warning signs that would be so obvious to me now. Slowly, I walked toward him. As soon as I was close enough, he grabbed my wrist. His hand was rough and cold, his grip tight enough to hurt. "This way," he said, pulling me toward a small exit door at the back of the play place. I'd never noticed that door before. It wasn't the main entrance, just a narrow door tucked away in the corner. He pushed it open, and a rush of cold air hit my face. The parking lot stretched out in front of us, dimly lit by a few flickering streetlights. The man didn't slow down. He pulled me along, his grip like iron, as we headed toward the far end of the parking lot. My heart was pounding, and my mind raced with questions. Why hadn't my parents come to get me themselves? Why hadn't they waited? As we walked, I glanced around looking for their car. That's when I saw it. It was still parked in the Chick-fil-A lot, just where we'd left it. And it was empty. My parents hadn't left. They were still inside, just as they had been when I walked into the play place. "Wait," I said, slowing down. "My parents' car is still there." The man's grip tightened. "We don't have time for that," he snapped. "We need to hurry." That's when it hit me. Something was very, very wrong. I stopped walking, digging my heels into the pavement. "I want to go back," I said, my voice trembling. The man turned to look at me, his face dark with anger. "Come on, kid," he growled. "Don't make this difficult." Fear flooded through me, paralyzing my legs. I tried to pull my arm away, but his grip was too strong. "Let me go," I shouted, my voice high and panicked. He didn't let go. Instead, he yanked on my arm, pulling me forward. In that moment, I realized I had to do something, anything to get away. I twisted and yanked my arm as hard as I could. My winter jacket, which had been loose around my wrist, slipped partway off. The man was still holding onto the end of my sleeve, but without my arm in it, he was left clutching nothing but fabric. The moment I was free, I didn't hesitate. I turned and ran, my legs pumping as fast as they could. My lungs burned, and my heart felt like it might explode, but I didn't dare stop or look back. I burst through the main entrance of the Chick-fil-A, tears streaming down my face, and ran straight to my parents. Between sobs, I told them what had happened. My mom's face went pale, and my dad immediately got up to alert the staff. Someone called the police, and within minutes, officers arrived at the restaurant. I remember them asking me questions, trying to piece together what had happened. I described the man as best I could, though my memories were already starting to blur with fear and adrenaline. I don't know if they ever caught him. My parents told me later that the officers searched the area, but by the time they arrived, the man was gone. For weeks after that, I couldn't sleep without a nightlight. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, heard his voice. I kept thinking about how close I'd come to being taken, how easily I'd trusted him. Even now, all these years later, I can't walk into a Chick-fil-A without feeling a pang of anxiety. The play place that once felt like a magical escape now feels like a reminder of how quickly innocence can be shattered. I was lucky that day. Lucky that I noticed my parents' car. Lucky that I managed to break free. Lucky that he didn't chase me. But not every child is so fortunate, and that's what scares me the most. It was about 5 years ago when I worked at Chick-fil-A for a short while. Though I wasn't there for more than a few months, the job left me with memories I'll never forget. Some good, some strange, and one particularly terrifying incident that still haunts me to this day. The work itself was straightforward, and the team I worked with was great. Everyone was friendly, and the atmosphere was generally upbeat. That night, I was working the closing shift, which usually meant a quieter pace toward the end of the evening. As the hours ticked by, the hustle and bustle of the day gradually faded. By around 8:30 p.m., the crowd had thinned to just a handful of diners scattered around the restaurant. My manager asked me to sweep the floors and tidy up the dining area. Cleaning wasn't my favorite part of the job, but it came with the territory. I grabbed the broom and began sweeping, making my way around the tables and booths. The place was mostly empty, but as I reached the back corner of the dining room, I noticed a man sitting alone in a booth. At first, he didn't seem too unusual. He was dressed in black, with a hoodie pulled up over his head. His face was mostly obscured, and his posture was slouched, making it hard to get a good look at him. I assumed he was just another customer finishing up his meal. Something about him gave me an odd feeling, though. He wasn't eating, drinking, or even looking at his phone. He just sat there, motionless, his head slightly bowed. I tried not to dwell on it and focused on my tasks. After sweeping, I moved to clean the nearby tables, wiping them down one by one. Occasionally, I glanced back at the man. He hadn't moved an inch, and I started to feel a little uneasy. Still, I brushed it off. Maybe he was tired, or waiting for someone. About 30 minutes later, I returned to the dining room to check on things. By then, all the other customers had left, and the place was eerily quiet. The man in the hoodie was the only one still there, sitting in the exact same position as before. The unease I'd felt earlier began to grow. Something about the way he lingered, unmoving, felt off. As the clock struck 10 p.m., it was time to close up. Most of my coworkers were in the back, cleaning the kitchen and prepping for the next day. I was the one assigned to ensure the dining area was empty. Taking a deep breath, I approached the man's booth. "Excuse me, sir," I said, keeping my voice polite. "We're closing now. I'll have to ask you to leave." The man didn't respond. He didn't look up or acknowledge me in any way. I hesitated, then repeated myself louder this time. "Sir, we're closed. You'll need to leave now." After a few seconds of silence, the man slowly turned his head toward me. His movements were deliberate, almost mechanical. When his face emerged from the shadow of his hood, I felt a chill run down my spine. His eyes were dark and unblinking, and his expression was unsettlingly blank. "No," he said, his voice deep and forceful. For a moment I was too stunned to respond. I stammered, "But we're closed. You can't stay here." The man stood up, towering over me. He was much taller than I'd realized, his frame broad and imposing. The air around him seemed to shift, heavy with an unspoken threat. Heart pounding, I backed away and hurried to the counter, where I found my coworker, Brian. "There's a guy in the back who won't leave," I told him, my voice shaking. Brian frowned and followed me back to the booth. By the time we got there, the man had sat back down, slouched in the same position as before. "Sir, the restaurant is closed," Brian said firmly. "You need to leave, or we'll have to call the police." The man didn't react at first. Then, he slowly stood up again, turning his gaze on Brian. "Go ahead, skinny boy," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. Brian stiffened, his hands clenching into fists. "What's your problem?" he demanded. Instead of answering, the man reached for the small vase of flowers on the table, a simple decoration we kept at every booth. He lifted it and stared at it for a moment before suddenly hurling it to the ground. The vase shattered with a loud crash, pieces of glass scattering across the floor. Brian and I instinctively stepped back, and I could feel the tension in the air. "Let's go," Brian whispered to me. "This guy's trouble." We retreated to the other side of the restaurant, where we found the two other co-workers on duty. Quickly, we explained the situation. None of us wanted to confront the man again, especially after seeing his outburst. We decided the safest option was to leave the building and call the police. We grabbed our belongings and exited through the back door, locking it behind us. From the safety of the parking lot, we watched the restaurant, hoping the man wouldn't follow us out. He didn't. Instead, he remained inside, pacing back and forth near the windows. When the police arrived a few minutes later, we pointed them toward the entrance. They entered the building cautiously, flashlights in hand. From where we stood, we couldn't see much, but we could hear muffled shouting. After about 20 minutes, the officers emerged, dragging the man out in handcuffs. He thrashed and resisted, yelling incoherently as they escorted him to a squad car. Later, we learned that he had tried to tackle one of the officers during the arrest, forcing them to use significant force to subdue him. Once the man was taken away, the police gave us the all-clear to return to the restaurant. Inside, the damage was minimal, just the broken vase and a few chairs knocked over. Still, the experience left us all shaken. That night, as I drove home, I couldn't shake the image of the man's cold, empty stare. The way he had sat there for hours, unmoving, and then erupted into aggression, was deeply unsettling. Even now, years later, I can't help but wonder what he was thinking, why he refused to leave, and what might have happened if we hadn't gotten out when we did. That night remains the scariest experience I ever had while working at Chick-fil-A, a chilling reminder that even the most ordinary places can hold unexpected dangers.